Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that operates completely in the shadows of high-level performance, the internal narrative of leadership. We're going to break down a psychological dynamic that literally dictates the reality of your entire organization. So let's just jump right in and explore this fascinating and honestly, sometimes painful journey from being a relentless self-accuser to becoming a truly aligned leader. Let me ask you this. Is your perfectionism driving your success, or is it secretly destroying your team's trust? I know, it's a heavy question. If you're an executive or a high performer watching this, you're driven, you're results-oriented, and your standards, they're totally non-negotiable. The corporate world absolutely loves this, right? They celebrate it as your ultimate secret to success. But we really need to take a quiet second here to self-reflect. Is that uncompromising internal pressure actually your greatest asset, or is it your most toxic liability? Let's be real, carrying that standard all the time is exhausting. To wrap our heads around why this happens, we need to define a core concept, and that is the alignment barrier. This is an uncompromising internal pressure, usually disguised as just having high standards, that actively drains energy, peace, and trust right out of an organization. You see, perfectionism is rarely the badge of honor we pretend it is. When left unchecked, this barrier is basically a silent killer within a company. It's not about excellence at all. It's a fundamental roadblock that actively damages your team's culture and, honestly, your own peace of mind. Section 1. The Perfectionist's Trap. The internal cost of external performance. Okay, listen to this. Perfectionism is not a standard of excellence. It is a self-accusation cycle. I just want to pause and let that sink in for a second. That intense drive you're probably super proud of, the exact thing you credit for your career, it might actually be an unmanaged internal cycle of deep judgment. The sources we're looking at reveal that perfectionism is often just the beginning of us choosing not to take responsibility for how we manage our internal lives. We basically get stuck in this negative, self-accusing loop that just consumes all our energy. So there's a pretty stark dichotomy between two types of leaders here. First, you've got the unhealed state. This is where a leader relies heavily on assumptions, constantly jumps to conclusions, and totally avoids the burden of personal responsibility. They might even weaponize therapy language, throwing around words like bitter or unhealed against their own team just to dodge a legitimate disagreement and play the victim. But then contrast that with the healed state. This is where a leader actually does the necessary inner work. They develop deep intuition and value true discernment. It's the profound difference between operating out of unhealed fear and operating with real clarity. Moving into Section 2, the mirror of judgment, projecting internal demons. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding what the texts call the mirror effect. This is this tragic phenomenon where a perfectionist leader projects their own harsh self-criticism onto their employees. They routinely judge their team with the exact same unforgiving eyes they use on themselves. Really think about how that works for a second. When a leader is completely fine with treating themselves with zero compassion, well, it becomes their default routine to judge everybody else just as harshly. Every employee's face essentially becomes a mirror reflecting the leader's own internal demons. They lose faith in humanity because, well, they first lost faith in themselves. The tragic outcome of that dynamic is captured perfectly in this quote from Danielle Abadi. "We have to grow cold to survive our own self-hatred." Wow. Just absorb the stark emotional cost of those words. To survive the constant, exhausting barrage of their own inner critic, a perfectionist leader literally has to emotionally shut down. They become totally disconnected, completely lacking the capacity to extend grace or give the benefit of the doubt to anyone else. And so, what does that coldness actually look like when it infects a workplace? Well, it creates this toxic survival of the fittest culture. The leader starts withholding mercy and kindness. They frequently jump to conclusions, and they default to believing the worst report about their staff. They systematically neglect communication, and ultimately, they force the team to constantly perform in this exhausting, highly unsafe environment just to satisfy their own addiction to perfection. Everyone just ends up walking on eggshells, desperately trying to appease a totally impossible standard. All right, on to Section 3, perfection to purpose, breaking the alignment barrier. So, how do we actually fix this? Here is exactly how that journey unfolds. Step 1 is insight. You have to actually recognize that you're caught in the trap of the self-accusation cycle. Then, step 2 is where the real heavy lifting happens, application. This means making the conscious choice to replace the pursuit of perfection with a steady pursuit of purpose. And finally, step 3 is advocacy. You evolve from simply managing your own thoughts into a leader who actively stands up for others. This whole process takes you from mere self-awareness all the way to creating really positive external cultural shifts. I absolutely love this grounded reminder from the text. Take care of your thoughts before they take over for you. As an executive, you have a profound responsibility over your internal narrative. The thoughts you nurture, those are the seeds you plant. The old rule of reaping what you sow applies completely here. If you allow your own premeditated thoughts to destroy how you see yourself, you are eventually going to become okay with those thoughts destroying how you see, feel, and treat everybody else. Which brings us to Section 4, the aligned leader, restoring trust and culture. Let's look at this final comparison. On one hand, the unhealed self-accuser drains the organization's energy, defaults to blame, and acts as a fundamentally unsafe presence. But by choosing purpose over perfection, you transform into the aligned leader. This leader restores peace, offers genuine kindness, and forgives quickly. Because they've dismantled their inner critic, they no longer view their team as a mirror reflection of their own internal demons. Instead, they foster a deeply gracious environment where they can actively believe the best in their people. So, what does this actually look like in practice? What are the profound impacts of an aligned leader? Well, they break the self-accusation cycle. They restore organizational trust and energy, and they foster a gracious environment. But most importantly, they establish sustainable inner authority. Achieving this sustainable executive alignment creates an incredibly stable environment. The team is no longer expected to simply tolerate a leader's unmanaged thoughts or play that exhausting mental game of survival of the fittest. The leader stops being a drain and becomes a true, grounded anchor for the whole team. And that brings us to this. True alignment means transforming from a cold perfectionist into an active advocate and protector. A healed leader doesn't just stop being toxic, they actually go on the offensive for good. They step into a role where they actively fight for justice, protect those who are vulnerable, and relentlessly advocate for their team. They use their high standards to lift people up, rather than tearing themselves and everyone else down. It's a real game changer. I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative question. Are you ready to dismantle your inner critic, replace perfection with purpose, and become an aligned leader? The choice is entirely yours. But remember, replacing that addiction to perfection with a clear pursuit of purpose fundamentally transforms not just your own internal peace, but the entire culture and trust of your team. It elevates your leadership permanently. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this discussion has brought some deep clarity to your own internal narrative. Until next time, take care of your thoughts.